Almighty God, you have blessed us with memory, reason, and skill. Help us to use them wisely in the service of our town government. We ask this in thy holy name. Amen. Salute the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you all for coming. We have several things on the agenda tonight. I think we will open the truck bids first. At the end of the agenda, but we can do those first. I don't believe it was advertised at a certain time, just at our meeting.
Champlain Peterbilt, $195,952. And then it's got an option of $192,104. M.A. Jerry, $190,700. Charlie Boys, $187,264. And they got another material. $194,445.
194,445.
Yes. What's in this Viking, Sid? What's that?
That's a snowplow.
And the other one is the Hemco.
Yeah.
And made Jerry's with Viking.
And that's what this is, two from Peterbilt. The 192,104 we get paid for the equipment.
You have all Viking now, Alan?
Yep.
Who was it from?
Charlotte Boys.
Boys.
Do we need to prepare the warranties? Did the spec ask for a certain length of it?
Yeah. Well, we have to do the bid, make sure that everything's down there, at least. Yep. And we'll find out tomorrow what we're gonna do.
If I'm correct. Charlie Boys, compared to M.A. Jerry's is $200 and some difference. Am I correct? $375 or something like that.
We're the one for 187,764.
Husband Charlie.
But that's with different.
That's what the, like,
I believe that one, you prefer to stay with the.
yeah, you know, you can just plug it in, yep.
That's it. Thank you.
What's your thoughts, recommendations?
Well, they let John, we'll look them over again, make sure everything.
Make sure everything is meets our specs. And then tomorrow we'll call those people. What's the person? Oh. So we'll have to go through the bid, make sure everything is, and we can get it out.
Yes.
Just one thing, is Is there any chance of getting the cabin chassis and the equipment prices separately? I have mine separate in my bid, I'd like to see the difference.
Oh, okay.
Cabin chassis and, it doesn't have to be now, but
Yes.
later it's fine on me, I'm curious.
Do you know if I made Gary bid it up separate, did you spend?
We bid it out of the package.
I did that. You bid yours, from Smith's, Peterbilt separately,
Yes.
did you?
I mean, I included it in my price, but if you look in there, I have,
You spec it
the
out?
equipment is priced separately in there,
Okay.
or I have a price on the sheet separately.
Well, we just have to, we'll make sure that meets specs.
Tomorrow morning, you want to come?
Thank you, for coming.
Thank you for the opportunity to do it. Good evening, everybody.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll try to get those for you if we got them, I don't know if we have, we don't have them for the one, that's for certain. I assume, David, you have something to share with us, you're here?
Well,
Are you gonna make
Yeah,
a
we just-
motion or anything? You're
So
gonna
you
make
have
a
to put
motion
that
or
in
just-
motion.
Okay. The motion is to have Alan review the bids, make sure they meet specs.
Alan and John.
We're gonna review the bids in the morning, and we're gonna come to yourself, and you can advise whether the winner that they want.
I'll second that motion.
On the motion, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried, thank you. Dave?
As the board knows, I do a lot of work at Celebrating Jews Tavern, and we have a proposal to try to find the cemetery where the Dewey family cemetery used to be on the town property, as well as where soldiers may be buried. So I've enlisted two anthropologists from SUNY Plattsburgh who have the ability and tools and knowledge to try to find this particular cemetery, and we propose a project of trying to find the cemetery on the property where the flagpole is today, on that particular property. So I asked Chris Wolf and Andrew Black to come and explain to the board what we propose to do, hopefully this year, and hopefully to make it a learning experience for everyone, for the community, and they'll explain what we want to do and exactly the steps involved with that.
Okay. We're here listening.
I'm Chris Wolf. I'm an archaeologist and professor at SUNY Plattsburgh. When David brought this to us, we thought it would be a good opportunity to come and do some community archaeology. It would be a project that was rather limited in scope. It would be under the approval of the council as well. It would be trying to find the limits of where the old cemetery was based on historical records, but also start to base it on test excavations that were small in scale, so probably maximum of 1 or 2 meters at a time. That would be open, so it wouldn't open up and damage a large part of the area. It would be limited, very scientific, research-based kinds of excavations. We are also trying to get some geophysical ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry, different devices that can tell us what's under the ground without having to disturb the ground. But that's the best way to do it, so we can kind of focus on areas. To locate the old historic cemetery and its boundaries, and maybe to demarcate them so they can be preserved and for preservation, or for maybe even people who are interested in the War of 1812 and tourism and things like that. But also to possibly find some other possible massive grave sites that might be containing British soldiers, that we would probably try to reach out maybe even to the British government and see if they wanted to rebury those or repatriate them. But everything would be done in agreement with you all here, and we would create a pathway for where the collections, where you could figure out where the collections would go if any were made, and we would keep you apprised of all the study and hopefully engage community members, including high school students, which is just across the street from the site too, to maybe try to create a learning experience for them and do more of a community archaeology project. So that's our basic proposal. And
I guess the concern would be, it's been shared with us, at least I agree with it. We didn't know for the actual digging and excavating the bones.
yeah.
Are we,
Well, I mean, that would be really kind of up to you. It's as the landowners or the town.
yes,
It would be up to you. We could simply just try to figure out if there are intact graves located there, and we could stop at that if that's what the town wanted. But we would also have that information to know that this is the extent that we would want to leave undisturbed. So that's one other option, and the other option is maybe to, exhume a few and do some study. But that would be at your discretion. It would be, it's interesting enough to us to just figure out are there graves still there that weren't moved over to the other cemetery, and is there evidence of mass graves, which the British government may actually want to know about if it's their soldiers from the War of 1812. They may be interested in having some of that knowledge. And it could be a really interesting learning opportunity if we were to excavate, say, a mass grave of British soldiers, if it is there. We don't even know if it's there. That would be the first question. But like, we're willing to stop wherever you want, and if it could answer a few questions, that would be great. And if they could get people in the area interested in heritage preservation, that's kind of my goal in many ways, is just to have people be concerned about trying to preserve some of these things, but also understanding the value of that information that might be there.
I should say there should be quite a number of American soldiers buried in and around Dewey's Tavern too, from the local stone mill, siege 1814. The problem that Chris was saying is these tools that would come in and image the groundwork may or may not give us false positives, and may not necessarily, may indicate there's something there when there isn't, and that's where the excavations would come in, where it would be minor, work.
Yeah, the excavation could be simply just ground truthing. You open it up. If there's a skeleton there, you can just photograph it, maybe, and even just bury it back up. But it would at least, give us that information to see if these kinds of things that we're seeing in the radar would.
how can you distinguish between American and British?
Well, you can't, but it's,
You'd have to excavate to do that, to find if there's buttons or other kinds of things that have some kind of indication of those.
The feeling of the board here, do we want to disturb those graves, or do we just want to identify where they are and probably put a fence around a marker or something up, I know I've had some concern about digging up quickly. I mean, that's what we want. If the British, for instance, if we knew they were theirs and they wanted them, I guess
Yeah.
we could do that. I don't know if they do that this day and age. Bones 200 years old, they want to move them.
They might. They've been known to do that in other instances where they would want to repatriate them and give them even military burials.
Calvin, you have a question?
Yeah, as you know, this cemetery is important to me personally. It's our group that purchased this and gave it to the town. I also lean toward not disturbing the bones. I'd like, to the best of my knowledge, besides the Dewey family, the only people who are buried there are maybe a couple of soldiers who were nursed, but obviously not back to health at the Dewey Tavern following the Battle of Plattsburgh. So I don't think we're going to find mass graves there. It was a Dewey family cemetery, so I don't think they opened it up and just randomly threw mass bodies in there.
The same spot where we suspect the British are buried?
Yes, yeah, they're buried in the Dewey family cemetery. The ones who died at Dewey Tavern
Okay.
were buried in the Dewey family cemetery. I'm not aware of anything that ever gave account to that, but what I've read about it sounded like there wasn't a particularly large number of them. I don't think the Dewey family, the stones are now at Glenwood, but if you look at the stones, they're all side by side in a very close row. So I don't think that the Dewey family were moved from there to Glenwood. I think the Stones probably were. So I think what would be disturbing would be mainly the Dewey family and probably a couple or certainly less than a handful of British soldiers. I'm not aware of anything that said that any American soldiers were buried there. And I know they've done a lot more research in a lot of other areas, but I'm not aware of anything that says that.
Yeah, supposedly after the Stone in McCall, there was a siege there at Stone Mill, and there was about 100 wounded Americans, and they were brought back to Dewey's Tavern, cared for in the tavern and in the house, and they said the ones that died, and you can speculate how many that is, we don't really know. But out of the 100 or so that were wounded, the dead were buried in the Dewey family cemetery, or nearby. So it's a 12-acre field. So they could still be anywhere in that field, and probably a larger grave. So probably out, to the side of the cemetery.
Did the British keep records of how many men they left behind, so to speak, in there?
I don't know.
Is there a way of finding that out?
Yeah, well, maybe or maybe not. We'd have to look into that. It depends on how good a record they often didn't.
Are we looking at 10 graves or 100 graves? You don't know, see?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to us enough to just, to find the extent, or if there are graves, because if there are graves and we do the radar, which means not disturbing anything, it's just putting it across the top of the site in a magnetometer, which would also give us some indication. The graves would show up really clearly in those kinds of readings, so that would at least give us an idea of where the cemetery is, and if there are any other possible graves. There might not be.
Yeah.
If I could just speak a little bit to logistics. I'm Andy Black, by the way, another archaeologist. With the ground penetrating radar and magnetometer, it will often show disturbances in the soil. So if there's an actual grave shaft there, oftentimes with the right soil conditions, it can outline it. What it often cannot tell you is whether, there's a body still in that grave or if it has been moved. Certain things like metallic objects do give a stronger signal there, but even that, if the graves were moved 40, 50 years after people were interred, sometimes the way, you're digging up, the coffins could be rotted, stuff like that. They could basically be collecting skeletal material and leaving a bunch of stuff there. So the ground penetrating radar can outline where things at least were or may be. But that's why we were talking about, that may give us an extent. It may even give us the number of grave shafts there. But it won't necessarily tell us whether the thing is still interred there or not.
Well, you could probably go to Glenwood and check where those stones are and and see if
Yeah,
there's.
you should be able to see if there's graves there.
So it could probably be included in your project.
Yeah.
It's not too far away from
Yeah,
you.
that
so.
would take no time at all.
Yeah, we actually have talked about that
Yeah.
as well, because that would be very quick and simple.
There would be no digging.
Yeah, I know personally I would prefer not to disturb the.
Yeah,
the
I understand. And what we would, as the ethics as an archaeologist, a professional archaeologist, is to disturb it as least amount as possible to answer the questions that we have. So there could be a way that we go out there with the geophysics and then report back to you of what we found, and then we can actually kind of decide what to do from there too. That'd be a possibility.
Keep us up.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is different than what's going on in Plattsburgh, looking at Pike's Cantonment, where you're digging for artifacts.
Right. Yeah.
So there you sift through them and you
Yeah.
try not to damage them, but you're not talking the human remains.
Right. Yeah. It's always more sensitive when there's human remains involved, and we respect anything like that. So we would work with you, what you would want us to do on that.
My only comment was to disturb it, least possible.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. identify them, get a cost on out for the number count, or, if you have any connection to any way of knowing whether the British kept records or not, that would be nice to know.
Yeah, I can start to look into that as
I
well.
wouldn't know how to do that, I mean.
Well, I'm more of a prehistoric archaeologist, so I usually don't have records. But I do have people that have done that kind of research that I can reach out to and maybe start to try to find this.
Would you assume these people are not buried in coffins?
It depends on the number that were there. If they could make a few, I think if there's a lot of wounded, they're not going to be able to create a bunch of coffins for a large number.
Would human bones disintegrate in a couple hundred years and whatnot?
It really depends on the soil condition. One of my specialties is actually animal remains, so I deal with a lot of animal bones. And I've seen some sites that are less than 100 years old where the bones are almost completely dissolved. I've seen others 200 years old, one of which I'm excavating in my back pasture as part of the university, where the preservation is so good that even small fish bones have been preserved for 200 years. So it really depends on the soil condition, the acidity of the soil, the stuff like where the frost is in the ground, stuff like that. So it's very hard to just predict without, knowing.
What's the town's liability as far as any cost to us, and how is this gonna be,
Well, we're trying to go to a few different sites, and so, not just in the town of Champlain, so there's be a little grant that we were hoping to get from the university that would pay for the equipment if they need to come up. And then we're trying to put together a little bit of money for the guy the technician that does the geophysics for the radar and the magnetometry.
okay?
But the rest of it would be pretty much student volunteers that would be helping us with things. So.
Well, my only concern is, we don't go with a huge backhoe.
No, yeah, we don't do that. We dig with trowels and brushes and very fine. So, I mean, to me, the most logical thing would be to first try to do the non-destructive, non-disturbance methods, and then come back to you with our results and say, here are the places if we can test, see if there are still remains there, maybe sample just a couple of places or something, or you can decide to stop there.
That whole cemetery may not be much bigger than room.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Well, the cemetery is supposed to be 1 acre in size, and 1 acre, we believe there was at least 5 people, if people were moved to Glenwood, which we don't know, there's at least 5 people who were not moved because the stones are not there. And then we also believe, the American soldiers who came back from the cold are someplace in that 1 acre plot, plus people, the British too. But again, that's a little bit more vague, as to, how many could be there. But I at least know there's at least 5 people missing that should have stones that are probably still there.
Does Glenwood have records of who they moved?
Well, they have records of when, the plot was purchased, but it doesn't really say if someone was actually there. You just know the stone is there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person was moved.
This equipment might be able to tell us.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about here.
Okay.
And that's a really small space, so no one took that on at all.
But even that, there's 5 people who have to still be in the cemetery that don't have stones at Glenwood, including the Dewey's themselves.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
I'm thinking of your ground penetrating thing here as something like sonar, except it's on the ground.
Yeah.
How close do you have to be? I mean, if you went down a foot, you probably wouldn't disturb any bones, but it might get you closer to what you need to do.
This machine can actually, you can take different depth readings going down to as much as
So
5 meters.
Digging
Yeah.
down a foot wouldn't be any advantage then?
No,
No.
you'd have to kind of have an idea of the depth that you'd have to get to. Yeah.
So,
I mean, you'd want to do that first anyway, is to do the non-destructive methods to get an idea of where, you don't want to just put a indiscriminately put a
Yeah.
bunch of holes in,
Yeah.
because that's gonna just destroy things.
Yeah, what we did for locating the flagpole was we looked at the old 1869 map where the Dewey property ended, and Louis Bedard said that it was in that corner of the property. So that's roughly where that corner of the property was in 1869, which would have been prior to that too, in the early 1800s. So that's why we chose that particular spot. So it's the best guess as to the actual
Yeah.
location of the cemetery is where the
Yeah, it
flagpole
seems like
is
it'll be
now.
up on that rise.
Yeah.
I guess the direction from the board would be to go ahead with the project if possible and do the least amount of, I don't want to use the word destruction, but invasive of those graves as possible. Keep us informed of when you're going to do it. I'd like to see it myself.
He's gonna be there every day. He's gonna be there every day.
But it probably won't, the schedule right now probably won't give us the time to do it until probably August, when we can get the machines out. So there'll be a little bit of a time, and before we put a shovel on the ground, we'll get your okay for that.
Yes.
Appreciate your interest.
Yeah.
This is really, you guys are interested in doing it.
And especially for the, Battle of Plattsburgh celebrations, which I do at Dewey's Tavern. 1814 is obviously the bigger event next year, September. So we're hoping that, at least have some discoveries, whatever they may be. So at least we can, do some planning, for next year. But it would definitely, benefit the town.
The other thing I would say is if you find anything of metal values, that you mentioned buttons or badges or whatever, we'd like to have those, so maybe we could donate them to a local museum.
Yeah. Yeah, what I'd want to do is create an agreement with you that, obviously the town would own those things, so
Yeah.
it would be up to you where the disposition of those things went. So we would show you and bring all those things to you.
We'd look to see where we could best.
We'd, of course, like to photograph and measure them and do all our archaeology things, but we could do that anywhere you'd want us to do that.
If
because
towns we would like it to display it here, somewhere else, or wherever, would be most appropriate.
Yeah, and for me, my other agenda is, this helps raise the awareness of people, those kinds of, the informational value those things have, and the preservation value too, so that's a good thing for my thinking on this.
People have concern, or share the concerns with me that they didn't want to see this thing patched up.
No, yeah, I share those concerns.
You go in there with a big bag on 2 hours and dig the whole thing up.
Yeah, no.
Don't worry about it. Well, we thank you for your input. Does anybody else have any questions?
Well, I would want to point out that this is very timely because next year, the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Plattsburgh, the celebration is going to start with David at Dewey Tavern, and it's going to end on our grounds with Tom Mandeville having reenactors there on the weekend after the Battle of Plattsburgh celebration in Plattsburgh. So the Battle of Plattsburgh is going to start here in Champlain next year, the 200th anniversary, and end here in Champlain, and this will be a great asset to that.
We thank you for your interest. Do it like board resolution. Okay, so we should have a motion to approve, go ahead, so to speak, with, I don't know how you want to.
There's no liability.
An archaeological dig, survey, or?
Survey.
Yeah.
I don't know. if
I'd call it a
dig
survey.
in there, you know.
To begin with, for sure.
So an archaeological survey of the possible finds of, what we think is remains of the cemetery? Somebody make that motion?
I'll make that motion as presented.
Have a second?
I'll second it.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried.
We do meet the second Tuesday of every month, and now that the general public knows about this, and maybe it would be good informational if you could come periodically, let us know where you're at.
I would actually like to write up something, some kind of agreement to what happens if we do find anything, so that we can both sign it, and so we can make that official.
I think that's a good idea.
But yeah, I'd be happy to come. We'd be happy to come.
Just give us as much
As soon as we
notice
find
as
it.
you're actually gonna be on site, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'd like to do that.
No, with the ground penetrating radar and the magnetometer too, I mean, it can also be, something to, again, get public awareness of stuff.
Yes.
So, definitely, people out there seeing what we do and how we can fund things.
That's a good point. You probably should do a press release if it's.
When you get started, so
Yeah.
you can bring your awareness up to another level.
Yeah,
That'd
we'll
be
give you
great.
plenty of notice before we go out and do anything.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, do you have their email addresses?
Oh, yeah.
Because I'll be contacting both of them.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, David.
I need to approve of the minutes of April 16th.
Second?
Any questions? April 16th. If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. The town clerk's monthly report. Need a motion to approve?
I make a motion, we approve the town clerk's monthly report. Good job, Julie.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's also carried. We've got a notice of, Clinton County assessment on a piece of property that we own. It's our sand pit in Moores and Amory Road. It's only for your, information only. It went up $1,100. Some good news. A letter from Janet Dupree to Alan. The increase of $25,728 in CHIPS money, which is a welcome. Just looking for information. That's one budget item we always send about. Friends of the North Country, that's strictly informational. It's pertaining to the requirements, need to meet the FEMA requirements in case of floods.
Wasn't that a report that had to be made on that, the way I read it?
Those names are all the people that are responsible. Mickey, the supervisor of the town council in the town of Champlain.
On the Friends of the North Country thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
You filled that out, didn't you?
Yeah.
Let's look at it.
That's all that. Okay. I hope we never have another FEMA incident. Strategic Community Health Planning is an event coming up on Wednesday, the 12th of June at the West Side Ballroom, pertaining to strategy for community health sessions and different speakers. Nobody wants to go to that? Okay. The next thing on the agenda is this early voting. There's a bill in the Assembly and Senate to introduce what they call early voting in New York State. Some states already have it. They're up to 2 weeks prior to the general election, you can come in and vote any day of the week. Of course, those results are not tallied until the day of election. But we're opposing it on costs. It's going to cost $50,000 to $60,000 for the whole county to do it. And you actually can vote early now through absentee ballot if you want to. But absentee ballot, you have to have a reason why you're filing absentee ballot. This one here, you just come in and do it. But, the county legislators, they've approved to also go on record as opposing this Assembly bill. And I would like a motion, if that's the desire of the board, to oppose it also.
My desire.
In fact, right here in this building alone, it would, including Saturdays and Sundays, so it means the building would have to be open. It'd be some extra cost, and I don't want to say inconvenience, but basically what it is. I mean, anybody could stop right now, 2-3 weeks before the election at the county office and vote absentee ballot or to the mail, but either way. This year, just manning a voting place for 2 weeks before the election just doesn't seem cost effective. So I'd like a motion, if we could get one, to oppose Senate Bill 1461 and Assembly Bill A 689. Do you have a motion and a second? Motion, okay. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's also carried. We need to,
We don't need to read that resolution.
not, it's a resolution authorizing the map plan report. We do need to approve it. The West Service Road will be taken out of that, maybe? That's already done?
Part of it is done. There's still portions of it that would have to be included on the east
Okay.
side.
I did look at the map today, and it does go all the way to the border.
Yeah, I know, but
On the
you
west
gotta
side.
include the east,
There's east side too.
yeah.
Okay,
I would like to propose, we're meeting with Bill Favreau tomorrow,
yes.
and like I said, we brought down those folders this afternoon. I'd like to have him give a chance to look at that, to see exactly where we are with the west, the west and east and west, Service Road District, before we go ahead and pass this resolution.
Do we need this to go forward?
But we could always have a special meeting in the event that what he has in place, and what the town board has in place, if this is necessary, or should this be revised to address the other portion of the agreement. Because we already have the west and east service road districts are already formed, and have been formed. The boundaries, I'm not sure how this compares to this particular resolution.
Okay.
That's what I would like to see, what do you think, Lincoln?
I would agree. I mean, we're gonna meet with the engineers and the attorney tomorrow. If, in fact, we do need a special meeting, I don't know that it's a stretch to ask for that. If it's gonna be something that's gonna hamper the
already have
engineers.
in place.
Yeah.
Who's gonna be here tomorrow?
I'm gonna be here.
I'll be here.
I'll be here. 2-3 of us, that's all. we
Three of
do.
us, that's-
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's just
We
a
can
meeting
pass
that
it.
they're gonna, I mean, we have questions for the attorney and the engineers about the actual components of district formation, and we have different issues with
It
benefit areas and district formations. There's a lot of confusion,
It is.
and, it's getting to the point where it's starting to cost money here, and we wanna make sure we're not gonna spend the same money twice, so.
The West Service Road District is filed with the state comptroller. The boundaries are there. I'm not sure how those boundaries footprint this particular proposal. That's my concern.
Okay.
Can I just, on top of that though, whatever happened to the idea that we're gonna try to consolidate all of them?
That'll be after we form the district. You have to form the new districts first before you can consolidate anything.
Okay,
Yeah, you can't consolidate what you don't
Yeah.
have.
right, but you're kind of suggesting that we already do have it.
We do have it, well, there's another hiccup here too with Route 11. Since it's established and we're not quite sure, it's not even listed at the state comptroller, that it's a district.
Yeah.
It's a benefited area.
Oh, that's right.
It was a day of discovery.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of questions.
Yes, but this is good, because we weren't aware that that was a district up there. And there's too many open avenues. We certainly should get with Bill and get with those engineers and see what we are exactly saying. I'm gonna say what Mickey said. We wanna make sure we're not gonna spend taxpayer dollars for the same thing be done twice.
I agree. And what about Route 11 going into Ross's Point?
That's something separate yet, but that seems to be, that's not been formed, for sure.
No.
So, but they're coming with a new map with all the potential users within the district. We have to go over that and make sure we're in agreement, because some of the property lines have changed since this was drawn. So this is all part of it, but
Okay.
there's a little bit of confusion. We all need to get on the same page here.
And we want Bill to be here for sure, to ensure the town is well represented on this. We're not getting ourselves into a hole somewhere,
Well, he's gonna be doing our legal work, so he needs to know what.
Yeah, he seems very concerned about this district already formed and this particular proposal, so.
Okay.
He's like a legal eye on it, put it that way.
Okay.
And Jane's eye too.
No. When they started stirring this up.
Okay, we'll wait on that
Well,
one.
that's good, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, we do need a motion to authorize a new checking account. Strictly for,
That's a sec, with the check there?
you got it there, guys?
I don't know.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Pardon me?
A new checking account for the water,
I've established a new checking account, some of the members have signed the signature card,
Yes.
whatever, and this is solely to keep the funds separate for this proposed project. In the event that it becomes a district, then the expenses and so forth that are accounted for can go into to be reimbursed by the district.
district.
Okay.
Okay. So I need a motion to approve a new checking account. There's 4 of us on there that can sign, so there's plenty of us around to do that.
Make a motion, we establish a checking account for the use of the water project.
I'll second that.
Strictly for accounting purposes.
It has to be a resolution, not a
motion.
motion.
Wow.
It's just the wording, that's what the bank requires,
Okay.
not me.
So I take it you're making a resolution.
Yes, I am, sir. I stand corrected.
Okay.
And I will second
Okay.
the resolution.
Any questions on this? This is strictly for accounting purposes for water sewer district.
They're not individual votes.
Okay.
Roll call.
Roll call vote. Okay. John?
Aye.
Dennis?
Aye.
Steve? Richard?
Aye.
Yes for myself. That takes care of that. EMS contract. Bill looked it over for us, our town attorney. We had a couple concerns. We need to share those. We just got that back today, his concerns. We need to share those with the EMS board to get some clarification, so that'll be on the agenda for next month. You have anything, Julie? Other than those?
There was a couple things Jane gave you, I don't,
What is it about?
authorize the dissolution of the town of Champlain 98.
Yes, I have that. Okay, the legislation has been introduced, once the legislation has been introduced, the town of Champlain board will receive a form they need to be filled out, signed and returned. Tonight's meeting, all the board really has to do is authorize the dissolution of the town of Champlain IDA. This has been in the works for several months. It'll be encompassed with the county, am I correct?
That's correct.
It'll be in the county's.
They have been taking over our business for quite some time, and now the Assembly and the Senate is now pushing for the small IDAs to
Yes,
dissolve.
okay. So we need a motion to authorize the dissolution.
I'll make a motion to authorize the dissolution of the town of Champlain IDA.
I'll second that motion.
Any questions? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. This is from Matt Cooper. Let me send this around too. Pardon?
Anyone more? Are you already going?
Yeah.
Oh,
you
okay.
don't want to-
Yeah.
Then look at that.
Okay, you see there's one correction there? The word secure is changed to seek. We will seek funding for the remainder of the project, okay? Secure means that we will do it,
Yeah.
okay? This way we will seek it. Whether we get it or not is another story. Okay,
Did So I should read it.
Pardon?
Read the resolution.
Okay, I'll read the whole thing. This is from Bernie Cardew. The town board supports a resolution to endorse the application for funding assistance through the North Country Regional Municipal Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Fund. The town will also seek adequate funding for the remainder of the project. The supervisor is also authorized to sign and submit the applications and all documents required. Okay, this is just to keep this thing moving. We will seek, we will not secure. We will hopefully secure it, okay? But we will seek. I do need a motion.
I make a motion to pass the resolution
As read.
to seek adequate funding.
I'll second that.
Okay.
It'd be nice if it was secured. Guaranteed.
Probably should be a roll call.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll roll call vote on that also. John?
Aye.
Dennis?
Aye.
Steve? Aye. Richard?
All right.
Aye to myself. I believe that's all I got. Okay. We opened the bids already. Do you have anything, Julie, as far as other than bills?
No?
Do you have any additional bills?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
From Novatech, new computer for code office and power supply and fan for the judges, $805.
You didn't know that, I think.
News to you, Mickey?
Yeah.
Just came across today.
Apparently his computer is not
Compatible.
powerful enough to, house your new
So I've been
computer.
swearing at it so much?
You'll have to new one too, Bill.
I do need a motion to approve the monthly bills with the addition that Julie just read.
I'll make a motion, we pay the bills.
With the,
As amended.
Second. Any questions on the bills? All those in favor?
all right.
Opposed? That's also carried. You have something else, Ruth?
No?
Does anybody else have anything for the board? Alan, you got anything, is the highway,
I've been working on the Roxanne Road, I got it all ditched and cut the brush. Now I gotta draw fill from the ditch and down, and we're gonna widen it 4 feet. So, be in a couple weeks, get where I can get up there.
So what time would you like to meet tomorrow, Al?
8 o'clock, 7:30.
Or whenever you want, just to be sure, I'll make sure you get the guys going and
Yeah, I'll go overhead for it tomorrow morning.
meet 8 o'clock, fine?
Yeah.
okay,
So there's no pressure on you to get all that gravel hauled out of there? They don't-
No,
That's good.
I just needed to widen the road.
Right. I remember when we made that deal for that property, that he doesn't care, you just leave it there?
Hope that it'll follow the spring. No problem.
No, that's good.
you look confused, or you got a question?
Well, I'm waiting for my turn.
What?
I'm waiting for my turn.
Your turn? Oh, go ahead.
Last month, we talked about that water deal there in the back here. And I called Judy Ross, the health department, she gave me a couple names to call, but everybody's going around and around, and it all comes back to the same thing. We have to do something with it. Now, they offered to give us the time payment plan, but, I mean, at the end of the day, you gotta do it. So, $6,500 is what they, Chad wanted there.
Is this a permanent solution?
That's what they're telling me.
They said it last time.
I know.
If it doesn't get done, we get fined.
We get, yeah, eventually it would come to that point. I mean, we'd be in violation. Right now, we're under a boil water order.
Here?
Yeah. Yeah, the machine's not working at all right now.
We don't drink the water anyway.
I know.
I know, but they don't look at it that way. They look at it, if somebody coming into the building doesn't pay attention, they drink the water and something happens, we're liable, the health department's liable, so, you know.
Is there any way we can put this off for next year's budget?
You can call Mr. Canoza and ask him.
I guess I gotta call the bookkeeper and make sure the money's there.
She's shaking her head.
It's not there. Nobody. I'm not saying that, but,
Well, it's unreal what they're making us do.
It's terrible, it's
And
terrible.
this is a $15,000, I'm telling you, you could have stretched a hose from Champlain to here for $15,000, so.
There's no other solution.
I mean, there are other ways you could do it, but the equipment is still the same cost, and then, you know, the wear and tear, I mean, if you go to a chlorination system, you're dealing with chlorine, and there's different things you have to take care of for that, because it's a hazardous material,
Who
you know.
recommended this particular,
It was a toss-up between chlorine or this,
with the Board of Health?
yeah, yeah,
Oh, we delete that as long as we could too. I mean,
yeah.
we finally put that in and it's not adequate. It's unreal.
Well, what it is the complex of the makeup of the well, rather than having iron water, we have bacterial iron water, which is the bacteria, and it grows on there's a quartz lens in this UV light, and the bacteria grows on that, and it impedes the UV light from reading, I don't know how many bugs it kills or whatever, for lack of better terms. And you have to treat the bacterial iron. And the way they're gonna do that is they're gonna put in a bigger holding tank, which we need, because when they wash trucks in the back, I mean, right now we have a little 10-gallon tank in there. Now, the pump starts in the morning and it goes all day when you're washing trucks. So there's an enormous amount of water that goes through this unit.
So is the well contaminated, or
I don't wanna say it's contaminated, it's the nature of a lot of wells in this area.
due to what?
It's just soil makeup, groundwater makeup.
You thinking insurance? You thinking?
No, I mean, you could've got a sulfur well, you could've got a, you know, a
So it
real.
wasn't caused by any one particular?
Oh,
thing?
no, the water itself is safe to drink, the bacterial iron won't hurt you, it's a cosmetic thing. But in making this unit work, it fouls it is what it does. So you're constantly going off on an alarm, and every time there's an alarm, you're supposed to call the health department, there's paperwork to fill out. And when this happens 2-3 times a week, I mean, it's just, ask Alan, when that thing starts to beep in the back, temperatures fly.
So what's the guarantee with this new treatment?
I can't say that there's any guarantee, but from what they're telling me, it's gonna solve the problem.
They told you this other one was
I
gonna
know.
solve the problem.
I know.
Just being the devil's advocate, you know.
No, I know, I mean, the way he explained it does make sense to me. They're gonna have it's a pre-wash, it's like a sand filter in front of it, charcoal filter, to filter out the water, filter out the bacterial iron. And then they're gonna run it through the UV light.
But it's still gonna be in place.
Yeah.
Why the water has to be treated that you wash trucks with?
It's not that, it's because it comes into the rest of the building, it comes to the men's room, ladies' room, the kitchen, and you have the potential of it's because the number of public that use the building is what triggered all this. More than 20 a day, you have to be a regulated water supplier.
We put a sign up, no public bathrooms?
You can ask Al.
I'm trying.
Call and ask
I'm
that.
trying.
I really don't know our choices. It's ridiculous, but sometimes we're not asked to do things, we're told to do.
We're being told to do this.
Yeah.
There's no asking about it. And the way I look at it, I talked it over with everybody, there doesn't seem to be any choice.
Is it possible to get another quote somewhere to see if we,
We can try other places, I mean, other plumbers or whatever, just to see. So do you wanna do it
To be
with,
compliant.
pardon me?
We have to do what we have to do to be compliant.
Right.
What are you gonna do?
I'd say, look for alternatives, look for another quote, but, and the bottom line is, we're gonna end up doing it.
What about that, Dick McCotten shade?
Dick won't touch that. I talked to him when we first started this, and he doesn't want anything to do with anything with the Board of Health. He's too old, he's retired to deal with that bureaucracy, he says.
Can't blame them.
So do we need a time frame till next meeting, or do we allow him to go ahead and do this? I think that's what Mick is saying.
The only thing about shopping around for another quote, the initial machine was put in by Rainey's Repair. Now, if you hire somebody else to come in and add something to it, if something happens to it, I don't know about you guys, but I kinda like to deal with one person when something goes wrong. Because otherwise, one's gonna be pointing the finger at the other one, and you did this, you did that.
But I don't know that you're really gonna save anything in the long run.
I think it's in our best interest to do what we can locally, that we have the town.
Okay. I say,
Continue on.
continue on, we gotta go for it.
We'll have to squeeze them harder on some other projects we got going.
We got another one we haven't started yet.
Yeah, actually, in a couple of weeks, I guess.
Do that.
Is there a motion on that, or?
Okay, make a motion to,
So it's good to have it in.
up
Yeah,
to,
it's-
up to $6,500.
Yeah.
Okay? What do you call the system?
So the UV light, ultraviolet, the water,
Enhance the
waterworks
water
town.
system.
Okay. Who made the motion?
I did.
Who
I'll
seconded it?
second it.
Any questions? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. I have one item for executive session. Personnel? Yes,
Dennis, are you gonna bring up the?
Yeah, as you know, our birthday celebration is coming up, Memorial Day weekend, St. Mary's Bazaar, actually. I did go to JP Signs, and, they're gonna make us a banner to go in front of our tent. And if it's raining, we'll be inside and we can put it hanging off on a table. I haven't seen the final design, but they're gonna send it to me very shortly. I think we'll just sell some Town of Champlain books, get a hold of Mr. Bono, you said, he
Yeah.
has them. Not sure what else we're gonna do.
I sent everybody, in today's email, a copy of a proposed brochure, so you could have it there to send people down to the timeline, so people would know to go there. And it just kinda outlines our portion of the history that took place here during the different wars. It mentions, I'll just look at my notes here, the French and Indian War for the Battle of Pointe-à-Fer in 1766, mentions the Revolutionary War where Benedict Arnold left Pointe-à-Fer to go up to St. John's in 1775. General Burgoyne camped on Pointe-à-Fer in 1777. The War of 1812, of course, all the stuff at Dewey Tavern and the British sailing down Lake Champlain. Civil War, there was a garrison at Fort Montgomery, and we mentioned all the different regiments that the people from our town served in the Civil War. World War I, it mentions the civilian military training, the Plattsburgh idea out of Plattsburgh, where they used the grounds, the commons up by the fort and some of the farmland to practice and train their officers for the war. And it mentions for the Cold War, there are Atlas missile base in the town of Champlain. So it's a little brochure that just outlines our on-site military history, and it'd be just a little handout. And I don't think the Board of Press would charge a whole lot to whip out a couple hundred of those. So if the town put something in the budget for that.
So you sent that in an email?
Yeah, I sent it to you, but everybody should have a copy of it. It came out this afternoon,
I've
so.
been on vacation for 2 weeks, so I haven't looked at any emails.
Yeah,
You
and
don't get our contact one of the Board of Press.
I'm sorry?
You need a contact person of the Board of Press to go ahead and print this, or?
Dennis is
Has
present.
anyone looked at what Calvin sent?
Yes, I did. It's good to me.
Yeah. I can get a hold of Elaine tomorrow.
How many do you think we need?
You can see how much, sometimes 500
Yeah,
costs you
exactly.
$5 more than
Right,
200, you know, so.
Yeah.
It,
I
you know,
agree.
500 might be too many, but it's
No,
probably
they're
gonna
not
cost you
gonna-
a couple
Well,
bucks
keep in
more.
mind, we wanna do something over the summer, right, with an open house or something, so whatever we don't distribute there, we'll, although, did you say this is gonna,
Well, it just mentions, it says 1788 to 2013, Town of Champlain celebrating 225 years. Check out our military timeline on the River Street downtown Champlain.
perfect?
Then it gets into each category in each war. Pass this up to you, can pass it around. Steve probably has a magic little iPad that can show everybody exactly what it says.
Oh, okay. All right.
But it's just a simple little brochure. I'm sure Board of Press has some pictures they could put with it to make it look attractive. And, we could sell, we've got hundreds of these Town of Champlain books. As I mentioned before, I'd like that money to go toward anything that we do at the park. And I kind of told St. Mary's that, you know, we could probably give them the same percentage that, like the rides give them or something like that, if it's 15-20% or whatever. Because the bazaar is a fundraiser for St. Mary's, and we're gonna be on the bazaar grounds with that booth, so it just makes sense to give them something. But we could probably, if people like David Patrick wanted to sell his calendars there, we could sell some of those for him. Because that money goes locally to different, doesn't go into his pocket, it goes to different projects in the area. Celine's got her book that she may or may not wanna sell on Champlain. But as far as the town of Champlain books, we already own those. The Bobden Park already bought and paid for those, so all that would be profit except for the small amount we give to St. Mary's.
Okay. Anything else?
So I'll be contacting board members, find out when they could work an hour or two. I'm not sure, I won't, it's kind of probable that I will not be available on Sunday, but I'd like to march on Sunday. Are you looking for 2 days, or?
Yeah, and Sunday's the big day.
The big day.
The timeline's gonna be there for 2 days. If you're marching on Sunday, you can march right to that booth.
I can try to help on Sunday.
I guess the other thing too to mention is August 17th again, that's when I think we should do the open house then. It would be nice to be able to make Calvin's suggestion generic enough so that we can hand out whatever's left over at the open house. We don't want them going down on River Street on August 17th, but, you know, something, I'm sure Elaine.
Well, they could probably put it so you could put a sticker over it or something in the future, and,
Yeah,
you know.
and then that could also carry over to next year as well, even though, you know, for the.
And I think, you know, Tom Mandeville was here last month saying he didn't think the town needs to necessarily announce this, but I think the town should. I think the town should make some kind of announcement prior to this reenactment to let people know that we are celebrating our 225th anniversary, and this is our first event of the year. And so I can probably come up with a few ideas, send it to you, then you can, but notify the media, the papers, and let them know that we're doing this, because what's the sense of having the 225th anniversary if nobody knows about it?
Right.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to bring before the board? Okay, I do need a executive session to discuss the personnel.
I make a motion, we go into executive session for personnel.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Kevin, you have anything?